Hi, I'm Ron and welcome to PopScicle, where I talk about popular culture, science, and everything in between. As you've seen from the title, this episode is about BTS, about the BTS song in particular, which is Whalien 52, and thus I am wearing a BTS shirt. Quite fitting for this episode. And even though I've been a member of the army only for a short time, since 2020 only, and I guess I can say that I'm a pandemic baby army. I think I could say that this episode is the type of episode that I had set out to do with this channel in the first place, which is being able to combine my interests in science and popular culture. Because here, I'm going to be talking about the science and science fiction of Whalien 52, one of BTS's songs, from a biological perspective. Since I'm a biologist by training, I'll be talking about it from a biological perspective, but of course, I'll also be touching on other science aspects as well. Whalien 52 is a track of the 2015 BTS album The Most Beautiful Moment in Life.
Part 2.
And it was produced by Pdogg and written by Pdogg, Hitman Bang, Brother Sue, Slow Rabbit, and our rap line RM, SUGA, and J-Hope. It's probably one of the more popular B tracks of BTS, given that it's, well, first of all, it's a very good song, very catchy melody, as is typical of a BTS song. And also, they've used a lot of the imagery, particularly that of a whale, in some of their other videos, whether a Tiny Tan video or the music video for We Are Bulletproof, The Eternal. A lot of ARMY also love this song because it talks about something very poignant and something that most people can relate to, which is loneliness, the ability to form connections with other people, the feeling of isolation. That's really what this song is going for in terms of its message, and you can see it from lyrics such as this one. Or the chorus, which is this one. And there's this line in the song which goes, "Believe in my hertz." And hertz is what we're going to focus on because it's one of the characteristics of sound that is really the focal point of the message of the song. Now, we're going to go into the science already. Sound is one of the mechanisms by which organisms, living organisms, detect stimuli from all around them and interact with the world. It's part of their sensory perceptual world, which we call the umwelt. And the umwelt is something that I discuss in another video. I'm going to provide the link up here. I do encourage you to look at it because some of the things that we're going to discuss in this video are touched on from a general perspective in that other video on the umwelt. But anyway, the Whalien 52, as you may have known from your own research, maybe you were curious about the inspiration behind the song, you would have realized that it's actually a real animal. Whalien 52 is based on the 52 whale or the 52 hertz whale, which is so called because it signals at 52 hertz. This whale was first heard by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, one of the top academic and research institutions in marine science, back in 1989. And it was further recorded sometime in the 90s, and since the 2010s, it has been recorded practically every year. And that's a long amount of time in between the first instance when it was detected and the most recent. And it is most likely the same whale, which suggests that this whale has gotten old, has matured, in which case it's probably a healthy individual. If it were not healthy, it wouldn't have lived for as long as it already has. And again, it's called the 52 hertz whale because it produces sounds at 52 hertz, which is very unusual. It is comparable, quite comparable to two species of whale, which are the blue whale and the fin whale. Now, a quick note on the science of sound. Sound comes in waves, and so it has a crest. And the height of a wave is what you call the amplitude or the loudness, whereas the distance between the crests of the waves are what you call the frequency or the pitch. And that frequency or pitch is what we measure in hertz. The amplitude or the loudness is how loudly we hear the sound. So those are two different properties that of course are both important at the same time, given that they are the properties of the wave. To give you an idea of what this all means, humans hear on a range of 20 to 20,000 hertz. And as we get older, we tend to lose some of that sound or some of that hearing ability on the higher scale of the sound. So we don't quite hear up to 20,000 hertz when we're at our oldest ages as humans. Sound travels faster the denser the medium in which it travels. And of course, water is a much denser medium than air. So it makes sense that a lot of marine animals, including whales, transmit sound signals. These travel better, more efficiently in the denser medium, which is water. We can actually hear the 52 hertz whale with our ears. Remember, our range is from 20 to 20,000 hertz. And scientists have said that it could be somewhat like a low moaning. That's what it would sound like. But in the marine environment, the 52 hertz is actually very unusual. There are two species of whales to which the 52 hertz whale are often compared, and these are the blue whale and the fin whale. The blue whale emits sounds that range in frequency from 10 to 39 hertz, whereas the fin whale typically creates sounds that are around 20 hertz, which is quite low, right, in terms of pitch. So you can see that the 52 hertz whale doesn't fall into any of these ranges. And so, because whales use these sounds to communicate with fellow whales, it would seem like the 52 hertz whale is actually not heard or detected or sensed by the blue whales and the fin whales, which is why people have called it the loneliest whale in the world. And it's rather sad if you think about it, if this whale really does have the inability to communicate with fellow whales. Now, what is the 52 hertz whale? No one is sure. Many scientists believe that it could be a hybrid of a blue whale and a fin whale. Yes, hybrids between two species can sometimes occur in the wild, although not commonly because of reproductive barriers between two species. But it can happen, and this could be the result of a rare hybridization event between a blue whale and a fin whale, but because it doesn't belong to neither parental species, it creates a sound that is unlike that of either parental species. 52 hertz compared to the ranges of either the blue whale or the fin whale. Hybrids that occur in the wild are often inviable in terms of many different factors. Hybrids more often occur in captivity, where people create them on purpose, like mules, for example, are a hybrid between horses and donkeys. You may have heard of the Liger, which is a cross between a male lion and a female tiger. These are often inviable, particularly the males. Male hybrids are often sterile, whereas females can be fertile, but then you couldn't really mate them with males of the same type. Like a male liger won't be able to create offspring with a female liger. Sometimes sterility doesn't appear until the second or the third generation of offspring, but it's often there between hybrids. Now, there are various sorts of inviability of hybrids. In fact, hybrids are not always formed because usually, even before a zygote is formed through union of sperm and egg cells, the sperm and egg don't really interact with each other because they're not compatible, because they come from different species. But when a zygote is formed, the inviability of the offspring, of the hybrid, I should say, can come in different form. And here we may be seeing what we call ecological inviability or behavioral sterility. Now, these are two types of what we call post-zygotic reproductive barriers, because these barriers arise after the zygote has already been formed. Again, a zygote is what you form when sperm from the male fertilizes the egg cell of the female. It's probably not ecological inviability because, as we have said earlier, this whale has actually grown to an advanced age, and we can tell that from the fact that its sound is now at around 50 hertz compared to 52 hertz. And this is one key evidence that suggests that whales deepen their voice, the pitch of their voice goes lower as they grow older. And the fact that this whale has lived for quite a long time highly suggests that it's not unhealthy. And it's not ecologically inviable because it is serving its own or occupying its own niche in the environment. But it is probably behavioral sterility in that we cannot expect that it will be able to mate with another organism, with another whale, again because it is unable to communicate with whales. And whale song, or communication through sound, is a very important part of the courtship, the mating process of whales and many other mammals. Now, very interestingly, scientists are speculating that the 52 hertz whale is actually not alone. There are probably other whales that are using the same frequency, but scientists can't really be absolutely sure how many whales they're detecting. It may really be just one through all of those years from 1989, or it may be several. And we haven't actually found the real whale. It's very difficult. In terms of the migratory routes, it's somewhere between that of a blue whale and a fin whale, which further suggests that it is a hybrid of the two. Typically, hybrids don't survive for too long or aren't very healthy or viable. So, even if it is lonely, there's something to celebrate about the fact that the 52 hertz whale has lived for such a long time. Hopefully, it's not as lonely as we think it is, especially if there are other 52 hertz whales around, in which case it's actually possible that it may be able to mate, unless it is a real hybrid, in which case it might not be fertile at all. Now, whales are actually not very uncommon in science fiction, even when you think about the concept of them being lonely and isolated. There are at least two examples of science fiction that I would like to discuss right now. The first is Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, one of the best movies in the Star Trek franchise. And in this particular film, you have the whale probe, which is this cylindrical, massive thing that visits the Earth and starts ionizing the atmosphere because it's emitting a sound wave that is trying to communicate with now non-existent humpback whales in future Earth, because they've gone extinct, presumably due to overhunting or maybe pollution. And the sound that the whale probe is emitting is actually destroying the Earth. And so the crew of Captain Kirk is forced to travel back in time to get a pair of humpback whales and bring them back to the future so that they could answer the whale probe. I won't go into the science of the whale probe. It's quite complex, but suffice it to say for now that it's one of the most advanced and most powerful entities in the Star Trek franchise. The amount of energy that it produces can destroy the atmosphere of the Earth. That's how crazy the amount of power it has is. But really, aside from that, what makes it fascinating is the very ecological and environmental message that Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, had, and it homed in on the loss of a species. You have the complete loss of the humpback whale, such that there comes this probe that presumably had been communicating with humpback whales in the distant past, when there were still humpback whales on Earth, and now they're wondering, where have our friends gone? Maybe that's what they're thinking. And this image of this lone cylindrical object that is likely unique in the universe of Star Trek. Maybe there's only one. Most likely there's only one such whale probe. It again talks about loneliness and isolation, being the only one of your kind. And in that setting, it wasn't able to communicate with anything. And that has disastrous consequences for Earth. The Star Trek universe has actually always been big on communication. Communication between aliens, translation being important. And my second example is Doctor Who, the very famous British science fiction series, particularly Series 5, Episode 2, called The Beast Below. And here you have the star whale, or a race of alien called the Whalien. It's literally a whale traveling in space. Of course, it's not a marine-bound or water-bound species. It travels through space as if space were the ocean. And anyone who has read or watched sci-fi would know that space whales are actually a pretty common trope in the genre. Here it's rather tragic. I don't want to spoil too much, but basically the Doctor and his companion, Amy Pond, discover that the space whale has been transporting the survivors of the United Kingdom from when the Earth was destroyed in the distant future of our planet. And on top of other things that I won't spoil right now, which are very tragic, the other sad thing about this is that, as far as we can tell, based on what the Doctor says, this star whale is the only one left of its species. There used to be a lot of them, but supposedly they were overhunted by humans and other aliens in the Doctor Who universe until only one is left, and it's under tragic circumstances in this particular episode. There's a term in literature for the lone living representative of a species, and that is endling, which, if you think about it, is a rather sad term, right? You have the end at the prefix of that term. So this star whale in this episode of Doctor Who is definitely an endling, which again brings us back to isolation and being alone and being lonely and being unable to communicate with other organisms of its species or others of its kind. It's also a very long-lived species, and one of the best lines in the episode is when Amy Pond, the companion of the Doctor, compares the star whale to the Doctor. Because both are very long-lived species. And I'd like to quote what Amy Pond says: "If you are very old and the last of your kind, then you just can't stand there and watch children cry." And this explains the actions of the star whale in this episode, but of course, it explains many of the most heroic feats of the Doctor throughout the history of the franchise of Doctor Who. Now, in both of these examples, we see the loneliness of being on your own, being unable to form connections with others of your kind, and that's something that's common in whales in science fiction. We can say that these are Whaliens, which is a term that is used in the song only once, but it's in the title, and it's supposed to talk about how our inability to communicate can make us feel that we are locked in and isolated from everyone else. And that's certainly how aliens and humans would be with each other come the time when we are able to meet an alien species. There would definitely be a communication barrier. We wouldn't be able to understand one another right away, which could potentially lead to a lot of conflict. And so it's amazing that the songwriters are able to use the twin image of the whale, the 52 hertz whale in particular, and the alien to denote feelings of lonesomeness and isolation. When we talk about the 52 hertz whale from a purely scientific perspective, particularly from a biological perspective, and when we talk about aliens and their failure to communicate with humans at first, which would explain actually the Fermi paradox, our inability to hear from aliens despite the very, very big possibility that they are really, really out there, we are talking about the Umwelt. So I bring it back to the Umwelt, which again is the sensory perceptual world of any organism. It's how the organism detects the world around it. It's the phenomenology of an organism, so to speak. And here we can see that the Umwelt of these species, the 52 hertz whale compared to the blue and fin whale, which are probably its parental species, and even compared to humans, of course, the whale probe in Star Trek, and the star whale in Doctor Who, each and every one of these species has its own Umwelt, which probably doesn't have a lot of overlaps. And so there's really going to be a big, big difficulty in communication. In fact, scientifically speaking, we've tried so many times to be able to communicate with dogs, with dolphins, with monkeys, and similar animals, and there has been success, particularly with monkeys and dolphins, but we can never fully grasp how another species senses its world. There's no way for us to completely duplicate it and completely understand it, probably even with the most advanced scientific methods or scientific tools that we can develop in the future. Does that mean that we are forever doomed to failure of communication? Not necessarily. There are many other ways to bridge that gap. And one of the ways by which we do that is to study the behaviors of animals. This is what we call animal behavior or ethology or behavioral ecology. It actually comes in many different terms. But this is a way for us to try to understand how animals, quote unquote, sense the world. And it can actually teach us a lot about ourselves as well. And so, using the whale and the alien as an analogy is something very sci-fi, but also very science and also very human. Like most BTS songs, this doesn't end on a very sad note. It actually ends on a hopeful note. There's a line here that goes, and I quote, "An endless signal will reach someday, everywhere, even to the other side of the earth," unquote. It's characteristically BTS to talk about us bridging communication gaps, being able to reach out to each other despite differences in language and culture. That's how they've been living their lives as artists ever since they debuted in 2013, which makes them the happiest of everyone to see that the world is engaging with them and responding to their message despite the cultural boundaries and the language boundaries. I think the encouragement here is to keep on trying to communicate, and eventually it will break down those barriers that exist among us. And that's really a very hopeful, beautiful message to live by, especially nowadays when there's so much conflict in the world. There is a Whalien in all of us, I suppose, particularly during those moments when we feel alone and misunderstood, that we can't get in touch with other people, but it's not hopeless. We keep on trying to communicate, and people will try to keep communicating with us. It's an open call for communication and openness. And believe in my hurts can be a sort of battle cry for us, a call to come together and break down these barriers among us. If you like this episode and you would like to see more episodes about BTS, about science, popular culture, and anything in between, don't forget to subscribe to PopScicle so that you may be alerted to new content in the future. Bye!